Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Hope you've had a good last 2 weeks. We are not going to talk about the last time I saw you. We're not going to talk about that. That was embarrassing. Not going to talk about that. Anyway, for our last Black Herstory Month story, let me introduce you to a trailblazing Black supermodel who appeared on the cover of Vogue and in her short life changed the fashion world forever. Donyale Luna. Let's get started. Born Peggy Ann Freeman on August 31st, 1975 in Detroit, Michigan, to Nathaniel and Peggy Freeman. Her parents were working class and she was the second born of 3 daughters. Her mother worked at the Young Women's Christian Association as a secretary, and since she named her daughter after herself, her work gave her the name Big Peggy and called her daughter Little Peggy to tell the difference between the two. Let me give you some context of how Peggy, and I'm calling her that for right now because at this point this is what she's being called, got her character traits and some of her inner demons. Peggy's parents had divorced and remarried 3 or 4 different times, mainly due to how headstrong they were and her father's alcoholism. However, despite this, Peggy and her sisters had a pretty normal and stable childhood. Her father took her to the local movie theater often, and when summer came, he took her to the local gym to swim. Her childhood revolved around school, movies, theater, and church, and she was described as a bright, passionate girl. She went to Detroit High School of Commerce. At this school, she studied data processing. She also attended the Cass Technical High School, which was connected to the Commerce School, where here she was in the choir and studied journalism, performing arts, and languages. When she wasn't at school, she participated in plays at the local community theater and at the Concept East Theater, which was an experimental theater. Around the age of 18-ish, Peggy began going by Donyale Luna. It's mainly thought that she decided to call herself this as a way of dealing with her turbulent home life. By this time, her mother was a single parent, don't know how, we can only guess. It is also when she started to speak in an accent that she seemingly invented herself. And I'm going to play some clips of her speaking. Her mother described it as a singing-like voice. I see it more as like a very unique foreign Italian accent. It's a very unique accent, I will say that.
My complete name is Peggy Anna Donyale Luna Freeman, but I just cut it short and use Donyale Luna. There are a lot of things that I wear, say for the magazines, that most people can't wear.
It is thought that she chose the last name Luna for its symbolic meaning because, you know, the moon created itself and she wants to create herself. Another one that I've heard that I don't quite buy is that since the space race was going on and since we were racing to the moon and she must have liked the moon and you can't call yourself Moon because that's really weird, she decided to call herself Luna because that's another word for moon, and so that's how she came up with her last name of Luna. I think it could be both. I have my own theories about it. Also, again, she could have just liked the freaking name Luna. What I want to know is how did she come up with the name Donyale and how does she land on the version of how it's spelled? I had to think about that word for a second. That's what I want to know. Luna, who cares? It's Luna. It's a beautiful name. And she also calls herself Luna sometimes, but I'm going to call her Donyale because she also went by Donyale. It kind of depended on who she was talking to. According to her sister, this wasn't out of the ordinary with now Donyale. She described Donyale as, quote, a very weird child, even from birth, living in a wonderland, a dream. Yeah, I am weird too. Also, according to her sister, she regularly created new fantasies and stories about her background, or as she called it, origins, and of herself. Given this context, can you guess what she wanted to be when she grew up? If you guessed actress, you get a cookie, because cookies are awesome. As I said, Donyale did plays at the local theater. She played roles in musicals such as Paint Your Wagon in 1963 and Anything Goes, as well as the Shakespearean play The Temptress. According to her then boyfriend, her eccentricness gave her a reputation. I have a reputation for my eccentricness. After rehearsals, she visited the local coffee houses dressed completely in black. She became known as Kook because the managing director of the Detroit Civic Center Theater gave her that name because she had a habit of walking around barefoot, not just around the theater, but also on the Detroit streets. Ew. I don't even like walking barefoot on my driveway, much less down. Can you imagine how black your foot is? Oh! And she was called a cook, too, because during the running of Paint Your Wagon, when they rehearsed outside, she fed popcorn to the pigeons. Personally, I see nothing wrong with that. You gotta feed the rat birds. She later said about her time in Detroit that she never really saw her unique beauty. Quote, "Back in Detroit, I wasn't considered beautiful or anything. I wasn't accepted because I talked funny, I looked funny, and I was a weirdo to everyone. I grew up realizing I was strange." However, fellow students at Cass Technical saw her unique beauty. One named Verna Green said, quote, "She was such a striking image. I couldn't forget her. She looked like an oddball to the run-of-the-mill student. Not enough people had told her how strikingly beautiful she was." And speaking of that, if you haven't seen already by the photos, let me give you an idea of the amount of uniqueness Donyale had. Look at her. Oh my God. Are you I don't understand how this became to be. She was described as a larger-than-life person with an ethereal character. She had wide, hella big eyes with a willowy, long, lean, graceful frame at an insane 6 feet tall at just the age of 18, and she would stop growing at 6'2". There's this one footage of her of where she stands up. She just keeps going. She just keeps going. She doesn't stop. She's long. I'm long, but she's long and little teeny tiny, so that makes her even longer. So it's no wonder that in 1963, when English photographer David McGabe, on assignment in Detroit, saw Donyale, saying he was struck as an understatement. Now, when he saw Donyale, she was in her plaid Catholic school uniform on her way to rehearsal, but he saw her beauty, and as he tells it, quote, "I was stunned. She was so tall and so slender and had the most incredible bone structure." That's also an understatement. The only bone structure that I can see that maybe can compete with that is Angelina Jolie. So he felt compelled to approach the young girl and tell her that she could be a model. And if she's interested, she should go to Manhattan, New York, and he'd help her. Now, to be fair, Donyale loved the sound of that. She wanted to feel like she could become something. However, her mother didn't like the sound of that, which, you know, I think she gets a pass for that because, yeah, a random British white man approached her young daughter and basically said, "You're hot. You should be a model. I can help you." I'd be a little weary too. And she tried to convince her daughter to not go into modeling, but to become a nurse instead. But Donyale was steadfast about trying to become a model. Luckily, her mother eventually came around and she set Donyale up with an aunt in New Jersey in 1964. By this time, she had already graduated from high school. Now, moving away from home, from anywhere, to New York City is crazy to do today. But in the 1960s? Culture shock is an understatement. By the mid-1960s, the civil rights movement was full steam ahead. By the time Donyale decided and moved to New York City, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which banned discrimination based on race, color, or national origin in all the things from public housing to federal assistance to, of course, employment, was signed into law. Also by this time, the March on Washington, where Martin Luther King Jr., the leader of the civil rights movement, gave his legendary "I Have a Dream" speech in 1963 happened. He had won the Nobel Peace Prize. There were race riots. The Black Panthers formed. The Beatles appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show. The 1964 New York World's Fair was going on. Pop-Tarts debuted and Diet Pepsi entered the market. There's a lot going on right now. As I hope you know, around this time, it was rare to see a non-white face anywhere, anything ad-wise, much less in the modeling world. Nowhere except for African American magazines like Ebony and Jet. However, interestingly, the only other industries that used models of color on their advertisements was the tobacco industry and Coca-Cola. And can I just say, I don't know what she is doing. Who holds drinks like... So Donyale just believing in herself and her abilities to break into the white dominant modeling industry is crazy. And when I say white dominant, I mean white dominated. Before I get fully back into Donyale's story, I need to explain how she saw herself racial-wise, because this is extremely important to her story. It's not only her story, but it's a big portion of it. Donyale identified as multiracial, and throughout her life and career, she claimed to be of different ethnicities. Unfortunately, she always downplayed her African-American heritage from as early as a teenager. Instead, she claimed to be Polynesian, which are indigenous people from a group of islands in the Pacific Ocean. She once said, quote, "I'm from the moon, darling." When asked about her heritage, she wore blue contact lenses and lighter makeup. She later insisted that her dad had the surname Luna and that her mom was of indigenous Mexican and Afro-Egyptian descent. Now, as I was researching her, I found a couple more articles than not, mainly blogs, of people that were upset with the HBO documentary about her life and how it basically skipped over her inner turmoil about her racial identity and really focused on the white part of her story. I've seen the HBO documentary. It's amazing. Please go watch it. This about her. Personally, I don't see it. I think they do a really good job at talking about her racial identity, inner turmoil within the white cultural world. And I saw some articles that overall people were just upset with her refusing to embrace her Black heritage. Now, setting aside where we are in Black history, 3 things. 1, clearly this girl thinks and sees herself differently. Don't get it twisted. I'm not calling her anything. I'm not diagnosing her with anything. Do not twist what I'm about to say here. Clearly, there is a different freaking soul in this body. Again, I keep pointing to the HBO documentary about her. She was a different being, clearly not of the human realm, from how she moved through the world, with how she had her thoughts through the world. 2, the modeling industry, now but way worse back then, is whitewashed and a half in America. That's a rant for another day. So she had to find ways to fit in a world that she really loved. And if that meant calling herself anything other than Black in America at this time, so freaking be it. Which brings me to number 3. This woman is a survivor. She survived her childhood and dysfunctional parents by pretending to be someone else. I understand her in things are crazy on my outside. I'm gonna go inside because this world is safer. And if you recall right now, America is dysfunctional and a half for Black people. And the effort white people used to suppress any kind of Black success anywhere, everywhere, at any time was insane. So it's not hard to believe that this type of survival method stayed with her into her adulthood and into the modeling world. Look, I really don't think she was ashamed to be Black. I really think she was embracing the side of her that she truly felt was her more true self. I'm sounding woo-woo here. I don't care. Clearly, this girl was different. And if this girl calls herself Donyale Luna, who was a supermodel in New York from the moon, who freaking cares? Who cares? When Donyale moved to New York City, she wrote a letter to her childhood friend Marianne about arriving in New York. Quote, "New York is a dream. A man danced me down 5th Avenue and all up and down Broadway. Men were eyeing and whistling at me. As soon as possible, I'll send you a picture of the new me. I'll be on top of the world if it takes every breath I have, every muscle of my skinny body. I feel it. I know it. I'll be some kind of star real soon. Real soon." And her predictions were right, and that was an understatement. In October of 1964, Donyale contacted David, who I assume was egg freaking ecstatic to hear from her and quickly introduced her to Nancy White, editor at Harper's Bazaar, who quickly signed her for the remainder of the year and got her first modeling job with the women's magazine Mademoiselle starring Woody Allen. That next month in November, she had enough money to move out of her aunt's apartment into her own apartment with a very good friend of hers that she had met, and they became roommates in their Broadway apartment in New York City. In January of 1965, Nancy made the bold decision to use Donyale's likeness on that month's cover of Harper's Bazaar. When she did this, she replaced a pre-planned, I'm assuming white person, cover, making the essence of Donyale the first Black person ever put on the cover of Harper's Bazaar in its, at this point, 98 years of publishing. Okay, look. Yes, Donyale is whitewashed. She is not Black. She's more of a peachy color, but you can tell this is Donyale. And this makes me upset. The person who was set to draw her said of the session that was held in a one-studio apartment, quote, I remember that the Bazaar editors came to the apartment with the clothes and that uniformed cops watched while Donyale modeled and I drew her. Beginning, middle, and end of the day. Regardless, Donyale is on the cover for the first time in Harper's Bazaar history. We're calling that a win. When she was signed with Harper's Bazaar, they signed her fashion photographer Richard Avedon to be her manager. Now, Richard Avedon was the photographer of the time. Some say the best photographer of all time in the fashion modeling world. He was respected like no other. He was considered the gatekeeper of fashion in America. So him signing Donyale, a Black woman, was like him saying, this is mine. No touching. Which was unheard of for a Black woman in modeling at this time. He didn't sign many girls, but when he did, he loved them. Being her manager is saying something. So when he was assigned as a guest photographer to the April 1965 edition of Harper's Bazaar, of course, Donyale was in it. And it is in this magazine shoot that Donyale shined. I mean, look at these photos. Oh my gosh. This photo specifically, no one had ever posed splayed on the ground like that. Like she looks like a puma ready to, no, not a puma, because pumas don't have dots. Do they have dots? I don't think that they do. Now this pose we see a lot of today. In fact, I've seen weirder poses that models do that literally make my back crack. But at this time, nobody had done poses like that. So at this point, she is literally defining how modern modeling poses is gonna look. He helped Donyale break that barrier for Black models, and it seemed like she would be going nowhere but up. And when that thing went on the shelves and her family back in Detroit saw it, oh, you can only imagine. They're like, oh my gosh, she's doing it. This is amazing. She looks astounding. My sister is doing this thing. Literally, space is her limit. But this is 1960s America. When Harper's Bazaar published the magazine and people saw this shoot, as you can predict, the white southern part of the country wasn't happy. The amount of backlash Harper's Bazaar got from the South was insane. So insane that some pulled their advertising revenue and readers canceled their subscriptions. Even though this issue and shoot would be seen as revolutionary and is revolutionary and especially would be the norm today, it was basically insulting to the white people back then in the South. See, Black models and really Black people were seen only through the views of us being primitive, known as noble savage, which is an actual term in Western anthropology, the study of human behavior, thought, science, stuff like that. Philosophy and literature, the myth of the noble savage, which refers to basically background characters who are unincorporated by civilization and is in harmony with nature. The best way I can describe this to you is, and I kid you not, think of Avatar. That is the best description of that used in movies. When it comes to the fashion world, this role had Black models presented only as outsiders, mainly from African cultures, because logic. Duh. I mean, think of the most classic, cliche African model look. We see this today, but it's definitely more tasteful and it's much more accurate to the culture. Back then, think of the weird photo of Josephine Baker in a banana bikini suit. I don't know what that is. What I do know is that that is really bad. Really bad. Really, until Donyale, Black models were basically background props. And unfortunately, with the backlash of this shoot, that thought process was Donyale's first of many never-ending slaps to the face that there was a glass ceiling for Black models. This shoot turned out to be her peak in America. Bazaar even said to Richard, after the backlash had kind of cooled down a bit, never do that again. The most respected fashion photographer in the industry at that point. Never be that level of creative again. Just letting you know what Donyale is up against here. Also, in April of that year, she received news of her father's death. Trigger warning here, this is really heartbreaking. This happened back in January of 1965 when her mother shot her father, her husband, in self-defense after he came home drunk and threatened his wife. Her sister Lillian saw the whole thing from the house window and said that the shooting was accidental. Why it took 3 months for Donyale to get word of this tragic event, I don't know. I'm not 100% sure. I couldn't find it. But she decided to not attend her father's funeral. Now, this is a common coping mechanism for incidences like this from people that are from troubled family homes. So all in all, from the backlash of the photo shoot and her basically being like, I can't go anywhere else, and news of her father's death, safe to say, April has been a pretty crappy month for her. Donyale was in the inner circles with insanely influential photographers like Andy Warhol, and he loved her insanely unique beauty so much that he put her in 2 series of screen tests in 1966. And I'm gonna play one of these screen tests for you. You just can't get lost in those eyes. Now, she was one of the only African-American women to be part of Andy's world, and he later had her in one of his films called Camp, which was a satire of his world. She's making all these strides, she's in the inner circle, she's doing all this stuff, she's doing pretty dang good, but she just can't get past the color of her skin. Following a short-lived 10-month marriage and her father's death, Donyale had a nervous breakdown at the end of 1965 and spent time at Bellevue Hospital's mental ward. At this point, her world was just black and white, and clearly this breakdown must have awakened something inside of her because she made another massive leap in her life and career in December of 1965 when she moved to London. She later described this move, quote, I wouldn't have to be bothered with political situations when I woke up in the morning. I could live and be treated as I felt without having to worry about the police coming along. When she arrived in London in December of 1965, it was here that she had her big break and made a name for herself. London loved her. It was here that she became the it girl. They loved her mainly because around this time, London was in the middle of the swinging 60s era, also known as swinging London, which was a cultural movement that was began by the young people in the UK that promoted modernness and fun-loving indulgence. For instance, it was during this time that bands like the Beatles, Rolling Stones, The Who exploded. More modern movies became the norm. The bob became a haircut. The British flag became a symbol. And most importantly, fashion blew up, which helped Jean Sherpton become the world's first supermodel and helped Donyale become extremely famous. I can't explain enough that she was everywhere in London and the people loved her and she became the it girl there. This is literally footage of her just walking down the freaking streets and people are like, who is that? Who is that? Oh my gosh, I need her picture. I need her autograph. She began appearing in films like Blow Up in 1966. She was in the German magazine called Twen? I think it's Twen, in a jewelry ad, which, whoa, what a spread. And whoa, and his earrings, yes! She found work in French Vogue. Time magazine did an article on her called The Luna Year. You get it? Instead of the lunar year, you got it. Yes, it's lame, but it's still cool. Which described her as, quote, a new heavenly body who, because of her striking singularity, promises to remain on high for many a season. Donyale Luna, as she calls herself, is unquestionably the hottest model in Europe at the moment. She is only 20, a Negro, hails from Detroit, and is not to be missed if one reads Harper's Bazaar, Paris Match, Britain's Queen, the British, French, or American editions of Vogue. Speaking of Vogue, in March of 1966, Donyale's biggest breakthrough happened when British Vogue put her on the front cover, making her the first Black supermodel to appear on any version of the Vogue magazine in history. I cannot explain this enough. Vogue is literally the Olympic gold medal for models. You have freaking peaked when you have been on any cover of Vogue anywhere. You have peaked. And at this point, Donyale has peaked. And she only goes up from here. These pictures, oh my gosh, they're beautiful. Beautiful. What the freak, America? Anyway, I cannot explain the gravity of this cover, of this moment in time, in modeling, and especially Black Herstory book time. I can't explain it enough. She appeared in many other magazines, including on the cover of Britain's Queen magazine twice. One time on October 20th, 1965, and the outfit, the lighting, that's a choice. She looks like E.T. And once again on March 25th, 1968 in a head wrap, which, oh my gosh. She was photographed for magazines in Paris and Italy. She was on the cover of Elle in July 1966, being photographed in Italy. She modeled in 1967 in Sydney in paper dresses, which was a popular trend at the time that started among teenage girls. Thank God that didn't last long. Also in Sydney, she appeared on the catwalk called the Donyale Luna Spectacular. And I think that that's where this photo comes into play. Oh my gosh. A little bit creepy how that kid is lying down there, but can't win them all. Speaking of catwalk, let me tell you, this girl could walk. Now, Donyale had the normal catwalk that literally makes my hip pop every time I try it out. I don't want any of you to lie to me. All of you have tried this, especially if you've been on a treadmill. Don't lie to me. Don't lie to yourself. We've all tried the model walk on a treadmill. And if you've ever watched America's Next Top Model, which I did for way too long, you know the catwalk walk is everything. However, Donyale was known to have an unconventional walk that has actually stayed in the catwalk world and is used by models to this day. Now, Donyale was attracted to the so-called radical creatives. Think of Andy Warhol or Salvador Dali. Really think about him for a radical creative. I mean, look at his photo. There's so much going on and I'm really confused and my eyes don't know what to do. Being around them, she learned about method acting, where an actor draws on their own experiences to connect with the character they're playing. Well, Donyale invented method modeling. Basically, she developed her own theatrical walking style, and it's unique. All these quotes are from an actual magazine called Method Modeling, a photographic model's guide to creative by Valerie Cargan in 1980. So this is real. Method modeling is, quote, crawling like a lion, grooving to the music, or suddenly freezing and making direct eye contact with journalists. Donyale especially did this. Sometimes you stalk like an animal, slithering like a snake, walk like a robot, or simply, quote, lay down and rolled from one end of the runway to the other. I would love to have seen that. Now, this is a very technical book, but Donyale just drew from her time in theater. This was her own version of a performing art. Bill Cunningham, the stupid famous photographer for the New York Times, describes beautifully watching her walk in 1979. Quote, "Her body moves like a panther, her arms the wings of an exotic bird. The long neck suggests a black trumpet swan. The audience responds with shuddering applause for the model's performance rather than the designer's clothes. It is the birth of a new fashion era, that of the spectacular show that rivals any on Broadway." By the time Donyale was in Italy, she had had a couple of different partners, including dating Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones for a while, but none really stuck. However, when she was at a fashion show in Rome, she met Italian photographer Luigi Cazzaniga in September of 1969 at a party. The first 2 months of their relationship was difficult because Luigi could only speak Italian and Donyale remembered like 3 words. But he remembered that he, quote, liked her for her love for creativity and for everything that wasn't square. The last thing Donyale is a square. Oh, and so they couldn't speak the other's language all that well, but how they did communicate was through LSD trips. Whatever works. Speaking of someone who is not a square, when she met Salvador Dali at his home in Spain, he described her to be his muse, referring to her as the reincarnation of Nefertiti, who was a real person born back in 1370 BC and was queen of the 18th dynasty of ancient Egypt. I have to mention this before we move on. Back in 1966, Richard was asked to be a photographer for a shoot in Japan called The Great Fur Caravan with Diana Vreeland, who was known to do these insane shoots, like Money Wasn't an Object level shoots, and at the time she was the editor-in-chief at Vogue. Richard still believed in Donyale and her talent and her beauty. Even though by this point they had parted ways, they still kept in touch. He told Diana that he had the perfect model for this, and I'm going to show you some photos. This is a very unique shoot. The perfect model for this is Donyale. She would fit this perfectly. He even did like a resume shoot. I think that's what I would call it, at least, in one of the dresses that would be used. Now, these photos, especially this one, oh my gosh, what the flip? I mean, she's perfect. She's perfect. But Diana rejected her. She said, and I kid you not, Donyale was too extreme for Vogue. This is too extreme for Vogue? Look, Vogue photo shoots have gotten a little bit weirder in my mind since then. Look at some of these other photo shoots from Vogue back in the 60s. Shut up. When Richard, rightly so, was stunned by Diana's rejection of Donyale, he asked why. Why? I mean, look at this. And this person said, quote, "Dick, you can't take Luna to Japan. She's nobody's idea of what anybody wants to look like." Richard is Dick, just so you know. He responded that Donyale is extraordinary. You're not ready for this. I wasn't ready for this. Diane responded to that with, quote, "So is King Kong." Richard had to break the news to Donyale that she wouldn't be going to Japan in a letter, and obviously she was devastated, telling Richard how hard she works, how passionate she is to modeling and this profession, and said, quote, "I don't understand why they won't hire me." When I first heard that, that hit me really hard at home. I understand that you can be as passionate and work as hard as you want. It's not always about the skin color. People just don't hire you. Let me just show you the person that they chose to wear the dress that Donyale wore. She looks great, yeah, but that compared to Donyale, there's no competition. There's no competition. I really don't think that she said that to Donyale's face or that Richard said that to her face, that was the reason why Diana wasn't gonna hire her. But you can feel the level of frustration in her voice when she says, I don't understand why they won't hire me. I do everything right. I look everything right. I can be perfect. I am perfect. And yet they won't hire me. Why? I gotta move on. She was in the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus in 1968, where she was the assistant to Danny Kamara, I think that's how you say his name, a fire eater. The only mainstream Hollywood movie she was in the movie Skidoo in 1968, where she was the mistress of a crime boss god. She was also in the movie called Phililis Tektilikon in 1968, which featured the fall of ancient Rome, where she portrayed a witch called Enathea. And what the freak is this outfit she is in? That's how I would think a witch in ancient Rome would look like. She acted and modeled all over Europe, but mainly in the Italian market. She went back to North America between 1973 to April of 1974, left, then came back in October of 1974 to June of 1975, where she did runway modeling in New York, California, and Toronto. She was on Andy Warhol's magazine Interview cover for the October 1974 issue. She was photographed by her husband for a nude photo layout in Playboy in April of 1975, in which she was characters like an angel or a mermaid perched on the rocks. And these are the only two photos I'm going to show you because these are the ones I can blur out and can kind of get away with on YouTube. The rest I cannot. But Donyale still wanted to be an actor. As I have said, she loved acting much more than modeling, if I may be so bold. I mean, again, at her core, she's a theater kid and she loved to be in different worlds. So it's really not a surprise how much she loved and wanted to mainly do acting. Eventually, Donyale and Luigi married in 1976 in California. And that next year in 1977, they had their first and only child, a daughter they named Dream after Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. Luigi said, and I don't want to hear any negative comments because I know there are some moms out there that will be like, yep. After she gave birth, which went completely fine, completely well, she came out fine, Luigi brought his wife flowers, champagne, and a joint. Though Donyale seemed to have everything going for her, she was lonely. Luigi's family discriminated against her. They were a very traditional Catholic family and just didn't like her. We can't assume the reasons for it, but from Luigi's standpoint, it seems like that they didn't like her because she was kind of a hardhead, going as far as denying access into their home. Now, mind you, when she, Luigi, and their daughter were together, they lived in this adorable home in a rural town outside of Rome, and she loved it there. But when they separated at some point, Luigi took their daughter to live with him and Luigi's family. When that happened, she became isolated and fell into a very deep depression. Jane Kennedy Overton, a model, TV personality, actress, and a bunch of other things, recalled when she was at a party in Rome that Donyale was at, when Donyale confided in Jane about her loneliness, saying she was, quote, just a girl from America and please talk to me. Please talk to me. I had to talk to somebody. When Jane asked her why she couldn't just go home, Donyale just shook her head and said that she couldn't. Though Donyale did everything she could to not be Black, society is really mean and will see your color first. Always. She was caught between the racial and sexual stereotype, even in Europe. Yes, she was way more accepted there than in the US, but she still wasn't fully accepted to the level that she really wished she could be. Later, Luigi said that Donyale identified as mulatta, which is a person of mixed African and European ancestry only. It began being used as a term in the US after the Atlantic slave trade, as another derogatory term, and after the civil rights era. Just don't use it. Just don't use that. Don't use the other one either. No. He also said that she, quote, felt rejected by the Black community and the white one. Her daughter Dream said, quote, people long for her to become a symbol for the African American resistance, a role she struggled with as someone who identified as mixed race. Donyale believed that her race question was America's problem, which it completely is, saying to the New York Times, quote, Yeah, I'm American on black and white, but I'm me. I'm me. Unfortunately, this effort to not be black in her life and career led to her getting lost. And though there is no specific evidence, her drug addiction caught up with her. Peggy Ann Donyale Luna Freeman died in the early morning hours of May 17, 1979 from a heroin overdose in a clinic in Rome. She was only 33 years old. Her daughter Dream was only 18 months old when she died, and many of her friends have said they just don't believe that the heroin took her out. They believed that she died of a broken heart. The legacy of Donyale Luna is immense. Though she didn't realize it fully, by the time she passed, the modeling and fashion world was indeed becoming more accepting of black models, which included Beverly Johnson, who became the first African-American female model to be on the cover of American Vogue in 1974. Now, I'm going to make this clear. Beverly Johnson is not the first black supermodel. Historically, Donyale Luna is. Since America thinks that when they do things in their country first, that makes it the first in the history of everything everywhere all at once, Beverly is the first on the US Vogue. Donyale is the first on British Vogue. If you really want to get technical, Donyale was the first black woman on a US cover because she was on Harper's Bazaar in 1965. Now, I'm not knocking Beverly. Love her. But Donyale, timeline-wise, is the first black supermodel and the first black woman to be on the cover of Vogue, period. Donyale has inspired many black women to become models, my girl Zendaya being the biggest. She was in a photo shoot inspired by Donyale for the 50th anniversary of Essence. And these photos? Whoa! 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 Whoa. Wow. In short, Donyale Luna was a trailblazer for black models. If there wasn't her, there might not have been a path for a Beverly Johnson, Zendaya, Tyra Banks, or all of the other black models to walk down. And yet, unfortunately, until recently, she was largely forgotten. Even black agents and models and just people who have been in the modeling and fashion world for decades had never even heard of her. But truly being her daughter, Dream couldn't allow that. When her mother died, her father raised her in Italy with his family. He had always told her about her mom, but it wasn't until she was in her early 20s that she really dove deep into learning more about her mother. It was over the next 20 years that she really got an idea of who her mother was. From her diary entries to letters to her, to deciphering fact from fiction from sensational newspaper articles and her father's time with her. It all accumulated in her publishing an article in British Vogue in 2019. I used this article for my own research for this video. I'll link it down below. Go read it. It's really cute. The article was also in partnership with a documentary Dream co-produced and narrates her mother's diary entries with Lightbox and HBO called Donyale Luna Supermodel. It was released on HBO Max in September 2023. Got a lot of my info from there as well. Made sure all my timelines were right. Made sure I was still saying things correctly. Was really encompassing her correctly. Please go watch it. It is amazing. They do a much better job at explaining who she is than I did. Donyale Luna was ahead of her time, and the world wasn't ready for her. She was ethereal, mystical even. She was too amazing, too unique, and too stunning for the world, and her soul was too kind and too loving for the world. And the world rejected her. She was such a wonderful soul, and she deserves to be known more. And I really hope I have done her sweet, magnificent soul justice in helping bringing her name and essence back to life. There you go, everybody. The story of the first black supermodel to appear on the cover of Vogue. I cannot express this enough. Please go watch the HBO documentary about her. They do an amazing job of explaining more about who she was. They have her daughter on it. They have her sister on it. They have her roommate that was there. This girl was just another being that was not meant for this world quite yet. The world needed her in order to become the world that it is today, I just relate to her so much in how she works so hard and is so passionate in her field. I just deeply connect with her. And she's, oh my gosh, I would have loved. This is one girl that I would love to have met and just hear her voice in my own ears. Oh, just be in her presence. Oh my gosh. But yeah, anyway, I hope you have learned something today. If you have, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And while you're down there, please leave a friendly comment. I will see you in the next 2 weeks for my next video. And by the time that comes out, it will be my 2-year anniversary of Moxie Herstory. I cannot believe it's been 2 years. And since it's the 2-year anniversary, I'm doing something different. And nobody can tell me anything about it because it's my channel. I'm going to feature whoever the heck I want to feature. But yeah, until then, do not be well behaved. You just might make herstory. See you next time, gals and guys.